Kia ora everyone, welcome to another G News update. Well, they say that no news is good news unless, of course, you're in the game of the news. And this morning the real news was probably mostly about the way that over in France, the government over there got kicked out, and they need a new Prime Minister because they'd set about trying to cut and slash things and go about the same kind of stuff that we're seeing in New Zealand, but the French voted no confidence in that kind of madness, and that was the end of their Prime Minister. So this is about the fourth French Prime Minister now in 12 months that Macron has had to kind of go about appointing and setting up again. So, well, you know, wouldn't it be great if New Zealanders were a bit like that? Because we've really been through the mill when it comes to having somebody that's just not really there. And recently there was a little bit of publicity with Jacinda Ardern on it, and it was a big reminder for everybody, really. I think that we used to have this really knowledgeable and compassionate person that could actually sit there and say, well, look, beyond politics, let's try and solve the real problems and admit where mistakes are made and do better. Who actually did pitch up at both of those Royal Commissions of Inquiry and, you know, testified honestly and openly in private, I guess, for the better of the country. And of course, the narrative in the media that was sold over at Stephen Joyce's NZME was misrepresenting the truth, you know. So people run around like Derek, a troll on G News right now, completely misinformed and unaware that Chris Hipkins and Jacinda Ardern and Grant Robertson had all pitched up and done everything they'd been asked. And instead they run around thinking in a deluded way that somehow or another they'd run away and they should have pitched up to some kind of witch trial, some show trial. And the other thing that Jacinda Ardern did point out was that all around the world, no matter who was in government or what position they took, many countries have this pocket of resentment where there's this very grievance-focused minority who are very upset, and they've lost trust in whoever is in government, in fact, and they become very disenfranchised, and they run around, a bit like Derek on G News this morning, kind of like just complaining about everything, but not offering no real solutions, and it's not really good for society, is it? So Jacinda had said, well, look, that does matter, and we want to try and reconnect. We want to do our best, in fact, to solve the problems, and that's what we should be caring about. So it was in this kind of context, I think, that we looked at some headlines this morning. One was from Henry Cook over at the Post, and there was another one over at Radio New Zealand after Chris Hipkins was interviewed by Ingrid Hipkiss, and both were about just sort of really beating up, I think, quite a lot on the relationship between Labour and Te Pāti Māori. And how did they do that? Well, basically they took some kind of very small issue that had come out where one of the members of Te Pāti Māori had said something that the rest of the team at Te Pāti Māori didn't agree with, and that MP got told off. Basically, he didn't represent what the party really thought, and that was known. It became public that it wasn't the Te Pāti Māori line. This was an MP kind of talking out of turn. So what did the media do? They knew that, and then fully aware of that, they went, well, could Labour actually work with Te Pāti Māori if Te Pāti Māori represent what this one MP was saying? And they knew that that was incorrect. They knew that that was false news. They knew that that was disinformation, but they were so determined to sell a newspaper or to get a headline that it really lets us down when Radio New Zealand and the Post under Tracy Watkins behaves like this, and then in the next breath kind of makes out that you should trust them, that they are the ones that, you know, keep to the standards, the broadcasting standards and the standards of the Media Council, when really they're just doing this kind of beat up to create a headline. So that was very disappointing, but it does represent where it's got to with regard to this government, who so hopeless that it's actually in its first term already behind in the polls, and behind in the polls before the major opposition parties have actually released most of their electoral platform and documents. It's very, very well known to media anyway that that's not going to happen before November. They know that that's when it's going to happen. They've been told that the reasons that Labor won't come out with all of its policies is because it's probably going to wait until the financial and economic conditions become very clear, and then it will fine-tune many of its policies to the most up-to-date information. So it doesn't get caught in that trap of going out too soon and then having to rewrite its policy and then being held to account about why it changed. So the media know all this, but they still play a silly game, and they focus on one party and they beat up on one party and they just single out one party. And this is Chris Chang, singling out one party at TVNZ, and I think it's probably fair comment to say that everyone at TVNZ supports Chris Chang in just singling out one party and saying it's very unfair. Let's just single out Labor and let's ask them for their early election reckons and policies now, and let's just nag them, day after day, week after week. Let's keep repeating this line, even though we've been told that it's wise really to wait until those economic conditions known closer to the election before you come out with economic policy, because the problem will have changed, the conditions will have shifted. So, Television New Zealand need to explain. Please explain why you're continuing to single out Labor. Please explain why you don't listen when the answer is given. Please explain why you keep nagging away at one party, and answer how that's fair, how that's balanced. Please answer that. Maybe Mikey Sherman, you could actually answer why Television New Zealand keeps singling out Labor for its early policy reckons and policy disclosures, but it doesn't ask National for the same policies yet. It doesn't say, well, why haven't you come out with your election policies, National? And what about ACT? Where are your election policies? Where are they? They're not fully costed. Where are your election policies? Now, arguably, they're in government right now, and they have been given the mandate to do something to fix the economy. And by now, after 2 years, they should have actually done something that fixed the economy or addressed the cost of living crisis, because those are the number one and number two issues in New Zealand. So how have they gone? How are they being held to account? Well, it looks like they're completely missing in action, and arguably, according to most economists, like those 16 that wrote to the government that warned them that they'd make things worse, they have made things much worse. And now New Zealanders are paying for voting for National, they're paying for voting for ACT, and they're paying for voting for New Zealand First. New Zealand First were quite laughable, really. They've just gone out. Winston's been going out with Lion Ryan at the Herald and saying that his opposition, like Chris Hipkins, hasn't had a real job and therefore doesn't know anything about business. And, a lot of the people in the Labour Party just don't know anything because, they really don't have the experience. But this is Winston Peters, who last had a proper job in outside politics something like 40 years ago. Didn't he join up around about 1978, something like that, and first become a MP in late 78. And since then, he hasn't actually done too many lawyer jobs. He hasn't actually been working in the field, but he's kind of there with Lion Ryan, who doesn't hold him to account at all. Because that would be what a balanced media would do. But this is the media that's run by Stephen Joyce, and that has a Canadian billionaire in there and his mates from the centrist on the editorial board. So we're looking at a very, very biased, untrustworthy outfit here. And so it's no surprise to any of us, really, that Lion Ryan Bridge didn't actually hold Winston Peters to account. In fact, he kind of fluttered his eyelashes and he danced around like he was a happy little boy who was trying to please his master. And Winston Peters got away with being a big fat hypocrite that hadn't worked in a proper job for years and decades himself, but was, calling the kettle, black, basically, the pot calling the kettle black. And so, we see that hypocrisy as New Zealand voters. We see this terrible hypocrisy, and we see this uncosted policy that You know, if it had been any other party, Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis would be breathing down the necks of those opposition parties for partisan reasons only, not for what's good for the country, like, say, the kind of thing that Dame Jacinda Ardern represented. What's good for all of us? What's good for our communities? What's good for Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Hamilton, Dunedin, Tauranga, Whangarei, the far north, the deep south? What's best for everybody in this little country of ours? Is it this partisan kind of unfairness from Nicola Willis, this silence where she doesn't lash out at Winston Peters for not fully costing his massive increase in KiwiSaver contributions that will be compulsory? The size of those tax cuts, wow, they're going to be big. So the numbers that are being flashed around are kind of in the multiple billions, you know, tens of billions of dollars here. That's outrageous. And of course, if you're partisan and unfair and untrustworthy, you're not going to call it out. You're not going to step up there. You know, you're not going to see Christopher Luxon call that out in a press conference, and he didn't yesterday. In fact, he was very much in favour. He said, oh look, it's all very well, you know, it's the kind of thing we do as well, and eventually he'll have to cost it up, but not right now. And then in the next breath he said, if this was Labour, that would be the opposition, and I would expect them to have everything costed up. So there was a double standard, and it's just not fair, and it's not the Kiwi way, is it? It's, you know, Christopher Luxon's lived in America for a long, long time. He's not really a Kiwi anymore as such. He's become acclimatised to some other place, and he'd probably go back there when he is turfed out in Project 11, which is the secret project to get rid of Christopher Luxon. I would say that Chris Bishop is donkey deep in at the moment. So, yeah, National cannot win the next election, I think, is what's happening. We're seeing it. We saw Audrey Young this morning trying to argue that the past dictates the future, and because it's never happened before, that Christopher Luxon will survive. And you know, if the economy comes right, everyone will love National again. Things will be fantastic because some aggregate growth figures go from negative to positive, and suddenly everything's cured, and all of the squeeze on your back pocket and the fact that you don't have enough money to kind of make ends meet will be solved because GDP growth is 2% or something like that instead of negative 0.3. So that's delusional, isn't it, from Audrey, and everyone can see that that's completely off the planet. And it's very hopeful. It's got to this point where hope is the last thing left. We're hoping for some sunshine and some vitamin D, and that National's fortunes will turn around because they don't really have an economic plan. Everything was really just about stealing credit off projected growth. They knew that growth was forecast to recover after the pandemic, and they tried to surf on that wave and say, look at us, look at me, look at me. And they got dressed up and they performed in front of cameras and you know, claimed that old projects were new projects, and that, you know, they tried to steal credit for OCR decisions from an independent Reserve Bank. And everyone could see it. It was just kind of like, you're taking us all for idiots, but we're not. It's not like we're Derek, you know, a natural, you know, that has a whole lot of problems and isn't very well educated. And when we're actually, you know, a little bit more sensible than that, and we can see through what Christopher Luxon's game is about trickle-down growth. And so now we're seeing this media beat up this unfair treatment in these articles by Henry Cook and over at Radio New Zealand from Ingrid Hipkiss and co, that are beating up that you just can't have, Labour could not possibly get along with Te Pāti Māori, couldn't possibly, because of this situation where Te Pāti Māori told their own MP off, and therefore if we just ignore that, then we can create this headline that may fool some of the population into believing a lie. And that's, I guess, what Radio New Zealand is coming down to now. And maybe that's what the Post is about with Tracy Watkins and Atlas Luke. But I just don't believe that that is the case. I think what Chris Hipkins said this morning about how when it comes to the time, you know, Labour will write down all the things that it has in common with its co-partners that it could go into a coalition with, and they will work together on those common grounds. They will also look at the things that they can't agree with, and this will be very, very honest and straightforward, and from there we will see a stable government. And Te Pāti Māori's worked with the National Party before, remember that. And of course, Te Pāti Māori is also much more aligned with Labour Party values than it ever was with National. So I think you're going to see that this is all fear-mongering, it's scare tactics, it's about it's scraping the bottom of the barrel. It's about provoking that resentment that Jacinda talks about. There's some small minority of racists and bigots that can't stand anything Māori, who will be afraid, very afraid of Te Pāti Māori, very afraid of the treaty, very afraid of honouring contracts or having any kind of integrity, of sharing resources. They'll be afraid of a big takeover. They'll be afraid, they'll probably project, I think, who they are onto Māoridom. They will take the worst about themselves that they cannot accept in themselves and project it onto others. This is kind of Jungian psychology, where the shadow of the colonial whites is projected onto the innocent Maori who's really just looking for less than a fair deal, to be honest. I mean, these treaty settlements, what are they? Maybe 1% of what they're really entitled to. So come on, New Zealand, you know, pull your socks up, be fair, come on, let's be good treaty partners. So those are the kind of things that are in the news in the No News Day on Tuesday. The other thing I'd probably just like to add is that Parliament gets cracking again today. So what we will see is this charade where Jerry kind of like barks at Labour and tells them off, and people who are female or on the left will get sent down or banned or sent out. And unprecedented and over-the-top rulings from Jerry. Here we'll see kind of a blind eye turn to Nicola Willis breaking standing orders. We'll see a blind eye turn to Winston and his game playing, you know, because he can never really be sent out or held to account. You know, he's the grandfather of the house, so he gets away with crap. He'll waste time, he'll waste money, he'll say lame things. You know, it's time he went, really. I think we're all sick of it. I mean, it's just, it doesn't help New Zealand, all the carry-on that goes on. Christopher Luxon will avoid answering questions. He'll say, what I would say is this other thing, instead of answering the question. Chris Hipkins will try to get him to answer the question. Jerry will not be helpful. Mr. McAnulty will get up and make a few points of order. Jerry will try and dismiss those. He'll look at it later on the footage, and then we'll all just carry on. And it'll be very, very unfair, and no one can really believe in it, and it will put off people from politics. This review of standing orders can't come soon enough, can it? Because it's a shambles, really, isn't it? It's really, really bad that crooked governments can get away with murder in the House of Parliament, not answer questions, and not even really address them. And Jerry, who can't even remember people's names, really is thought of as one of the better speakers. Isn't that interesting? So anyway, that all starts again at 2 o'clock today. I'll be covering it, so I'll have some highlights, I suppose, from some of the interactions today. And, you know, that's basically what we can look forward to. It's been a shocker of a year, really, when it comes to Nicola Willis and her performance over the ferries and also over the Reserve Bank, and all the way she knew everything and the way that she didn't be open and transparent with New Zealand and then try and blame everybody else of the same thing. So again, it's projection of everything that's wrong with Nicola Willis is projected onto the Reserve Bank. And with the likes of partisan media in the New Zealand Herald, Stephen Joyce's Herald, you're not going to get a very, very balanced media. So it's not surprising that we don't have much trust in this arrangement, because why should we trust it? It is one-sided. So that's about all I had to say. I think there's probably a little bit more there about a newspaper article that Thomas Coughlin has released today that just goes to show that there was a secret Treasury report that showed that the National Party were in on shrinking public services, delivering less service to you, worse services, less services, and that was a way in which you know, they could try and sell that and get around that and you know, deliver that kind of thing for New Zealanders as our population increases, and really just lower the standards of service for all of us. So when this kind of stuff comes out, you shouldn't be too surprised. It's bad, it's wrong, it's the kind of cranky, corrupt stuff that we will see from a secretive government that isn't straight up with us, that can't be trusted, that coming into an election year will make a whole lot of promises that they don't intend to keep again. And we'll probably, some of us will remember the $250 a week that nobody got. Some of us will remember the family flop that hardly any families took up, 153 families when it was supposed to be 21,000 last time. We'll remember the foreign buyers tax, how they tried to sell off our houses for $2 million and 15% tax that didn't add up because they just made mistake after mistake. We'll remember those 13 cancer drugs they couldn't be bothered getting around to until there was a big backlash. We'll remember the 180,000 low-paid women who had their pay equity stolen. We'll remember the way that they treated teachers after stealing their pay equity by offering them, this real terms pay cut stuff and then saying there wasn't any more money left, when at the same time they were paying out the directors on the board of Crown entities 80% increases and just saying, well, we've got to attract quality. But it didn't matter. Quality didn't matter when it came to teachers, did it? And the way in which they've treated our public health servants, just disgraceful. The way in which our nurses are put under so much pressure, how there's so many shifts that are understaffed, the way in which they've created these measures for themselves that only measure things that they think they can fix, but that there are vast areas that are not being fixed, that are going to rack and ruin. And New Zealand, needs to throw all of this game playing aside and kind of see clearly that it's time that this government hit the road, Jack, and don't come back. So on a No News Tuesday, we're going back to Parliament at 2 o'clock, and I'll see you all a little bit later on. I'm standing down at the end of the Wharf Road. This is where there's actually a boat ramp and people take their boats out into this bay. Behind me is where the Sea-Link car ferry comes in. You can vaguely, right in the background, just see where the new marina over there is. And this is not an area that I come to very often, but it's a very beautiful bay and very tranquil, and it's very sheltered, like a lot of parts on this side of the island, the long sheltering island, Waiheke Island. So here we're actually got a thriving little democracy, and last night we had local board candidates stand up in the local artworks theatre and tell us what they represented and answered questions. And we're seeing the same kind of thing repeat everywhere, but there are a few places that actually have such an engaged population as Waiheke Island. And Waiheke Island probably is a bit of a litmus test in some ways for the rest of New Zealand. We'll be looking at putting solar on our roofs here. We'll be looking at being fairly self-sufficient. We'll be looking at keeping lots and lots of things about this place the same, rather than destroying a certain way of life and a character that involves a lot of trees and a strong environmental consciousness. This is the kind of thing that could be the case for a lot of New Zealand, and we can actually have this kind of paradise if we're prepared to vote for it. So what I would just say is that vote for a Labour, Green and TPM government, and let's get rid of this one. Make it a one-term government. Talk to you all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah.